Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the South Carolina Regional, a virtual experience. This has been a great event so far. Thank you to all our exhibitors for participating in our trade show, and to all of you for taking time out to be with us today. I am Chetan Patel, South Carolina Regional Director. I'm honored to serve as your Regional Director. It is a privilege to work on behalf of you and to be an advocate on initiatives and issues AAHOA is constantly working on.
All right, we have breaking news now. World Health Organization has just declared coronavirus a pandemic at this point. I would like to thank our sponsors, Chase, Red Lion Hotel Corporation, and the People's Bank. Their support means so much for our association, and we are grateful for their partnership. Your involvement is key to AAHOA success. Our officers, our board, and our ambassadors are all volunteers. I would like to recognize the South Carolina ambassadors. They work tirelessly in our region to support AAHOA. Benal Desai, Geeta Patel, Hetal Patel, Hitan Patel, Kaushal Shah, Leena Patel, Mehul Patel, Neil Patel, Sheila Bivik, and Ketul Patel. I would also like to recognize our South Carolina 2019 Premier Ambassadors, Neil Patel and Hetal Patel. They went above and beyond in service to AAHOA and to our nation's hoteliers, and we are grateful for their service. Now let us take a moment to review our regional performance. As you can see, South Carolina has 330 paid members, 248 lifetime members. I urge to encourage you to work with your networks to join and renew their AAHOA membership. Hoteliers are struggling right now, and we need to rely on each other more than ever. If you have a friend or family member who is not yet an AAHOA member, help them out. Encourage them to be a member today and to take advantage of all the resources AAHOA has to offer. As a reminder, AAHOA membership is free for those of you who own a Red Lion Hotel Corporation hotel or a G6 franchisee. Also, if you are a fellow hotelier as a Wyndham franchisee and have never been an AAHOA member in the past, you too are eligible for free membership. This year, our region has raised $5,257 for the AAHOA PAC. If you have not yet donated to our PAC, you can do so right now securely through AAHOA.com
or here at the regional by visiting the information desk. Your support is greatly appreciated. Here are the names of those who have donated to AAHOA's PAC at 365 or higher. We are grateful for your support. AAHOA supports candidates who support small business, and more specifically, hoteliers. Here are the candidates the AAHOA PAC is supporting in our region. As you know, tomorrow is November 3rd, Election Day. If you have not voted yet, please make plans to vote tomorrow. As a citizen, it is one of the most important things you can do for our country right now. We need to make our voices heard. Show off that I voted stickers proudly. We work best when we work together. I'm proud of what we have accomplished, especially in the face of this pandemic. I am grateful for your support and your participation, especially all of you who have updated your property information data at myahoa.com. When you update your property information data, it helps us help you, such as when we're talking with brands, vendors, or elected officials. It helps us paint a more complete picture of your influence as job creators and leaders in the business and in your community. We also need your emails and phone numbers. And be sure to opt in to receive the latest AAHOA news and special deals. Please take a few minutes today. Update your property information through myahoa.com and help us better advocate for you and best communicate with you. We have several important events coming up, including additional regional events. Log into AAHOA.com every day to find out new events to attend, even virtually. We have new ones every day. And in our region, we have the North Carolina Charity Golf Tournament, August 7th through 8th, 2021, in Concord, North Carolina. I'm looking forward to a great year. Finally, it is my privilege to introduce our panel who will be discussing the 2020 state of the lodging industry and our top issues in our region. Please join me in welcoming Dwayne Parrish, South Carolina Department of Parks, Recreation and Tourism, DJ Rama, President and CEO of Aurora Hotels, Dino Tapera, an attorney who works in the administration with President Donald J. Trump, and our moderator, Douglas O'Flaherty, Vice President, South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Chet. As Chet mentioned, I'm Douglas O'Flaherty. I'm with the South Carolina Restaurant Lodging Association, and I will serve as your moderator today. To get things started, I do want to just a quick reminder that if you have not muted your line and you're not speaking, please mute your line. It just helps with the background noise for everybody that is listening to the recording and listening to the presentations. You know, and as Chet mentioned earlier in his talk, you know, March turned everyone's life upside down. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the hospitality industry came to an abrupt halt. And although there are some resurgence, we are far from where we need to be. In addition to the regular operations and the regular regulations that hotels face every single day, hotel managers and operators are now expected to follow additional set of rules, regulations surrounding the COVID from the U.S. Department of Labor and other regulatory agencies, making it more challenging to find qualified help. As if it wasn't challenging enough already pre-COVID, we have now added that dynamic into the mix. The South Carolina Restaurant Lodging Association, in partnership with AAHOA, is on the front lines assisting hotel owners and operators in finding safe and sustainable ways to keep their staff and their guests safe. Just remember that it's very important to connect with your local, state, and federal officials. Call, email, tweet, text your story. They hear from our office, they hear from AAHOA all the time. We are constantly pinging them and letting them know how the industry is doing. But to actually hear a story from an operator is paramount to the success of our associations. The SCRLA will continue to work with local municipalities as well as state and federal to take a look at necessary guidelines to sustain DMO and CDB funding for marketing and promotions. Our office has partnered with SCSAE, the South Carolina Society of Association Executives, to develop safe meeting guidelines to help meeting planners to host in-person events to help and start with conventions, meetings, and events. Although sales may be coming back and they might be a little better than they were 6 months ago, as I mentioned earlier, we still have a long way to recovery. Today, we have an excellent panel to share those thoughts and ideas, and I'd like to take the opportunity to ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about themselves and tell us who they are. So DJ, if we can, will you just do a brief bio and introduction for us?
Sure. DJ Rama, we've been in South Carolina since 1976, and we span across different states and also India. We're based out of Greenville, South Carolina. We have 7,000 rooms and 36 locations. So obviously, as Douglas mentioned earlier, in our 47-year history as a privately held owner-operator, we've never seen a pandemic and a revenue decline as we have here. So there's no playbook here. The playbook is all working together as it's been demonstrated here by Chetan and Douglas, what they mentioned earlier. So look forward to sharing with you our news and what we've done so far. And thank you for inviting us to the panel.
Absolutely, and we've got some great questions for you, DJ, and I'll come back to those in just a quick second. Dino, if you can, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that. So I live here in Columbia, South Carolina, and I worked for Congressman Joe Wilson, who represents the 2nd District of South Carolina for 7 years on Capitol Hill in the Washington, D.C. office. And that's where I had a chance to work with the South Carolina restaurant and hospitality industry, worked with some great leaders, both in the restaurant and hotel industry across South Carolina. So actually I first met the Rama family from Greenville when I worked for Congressman Wilson, and met with Bobby Williams, who owns his family runs a very famous restaurant chain in South Carolina. When I first moved here 22 years ago, when I found the name Lizard's Thicket, I didn't know what they serve there, but they don't serve lizards. They serve comfort Southern food. I used to actually meet a group there every Wednesday in Lexington before the pandemic. So since COVID, I have not eaten inside a restaurant. So it shows you just how much our revenues have been impacted in the hospitality industry in the state across the board, especially with our state being a tourist state. So I first met Dwayne Parrish when I worked for Congressman Wilson. And when my wife and I started a family, we moved back to South Carolina. And I worked in Governor Nikki Haley's administration as the assistant director of a cabinet agency, the Department of Employment and Workforce. Then I had the great fortune of working for 2 state superintendents of education at the South Carolina Department of Education for 6 years. And it was a great learning experience to understand how we try to link education and workforce needs across the state. And I was very fortunate to have been appointed by the president to work at the U.S. Department of Education for 1 year. Then I was appointed by the president to work at the U.S. Department of Defense this January. So I've served in the administration for 2 years, and it's been an honor to work for my congressman, governor, and the president. And my family, we're AAHOA members because we own a hotel in the Midlands in Columbia, South Carolina, in Kershaw County. So we are hotel owners. We've all been impacted by the pandemic, and I think it's great to have this opportunity to discuss the way ahead and how we try to turn the corner as fast as we can to bring back the tourism and hospitality industry in the state.
Great. Thank you, Dino. Certainly a wealth of information there. We'll come back to you with a couple of questions as well. And then finally, Dwayne Parrish. Dwayne, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, glad to. Thank you, Douglas. As Douglas mentioned, I'm the director of South Carolina Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, which is a cabinet agency in the state of South Carolina. I was originally appointed by Governor Nikki Haley in January of 2011. So in this in about 10 years now. Stayed over when Governor McMaster assumed the position of governor and then was elected in 2 years ago. All of my career prior to that was in the hotel business. I was literally, my mother and father were Best Western members of Best Western at the time in the 70s. Worked in their hotels, been in it all my life. Worked for what was Promise Hotels, originally Holiday Corporation, now part of Hilton for roughly a decade, then started my own hotel management development company for a number of years. Was in that up until I came to work for the state, and even had that for a couple of years after that. But it's always been about heads in the beds for me from the time I was a teenager, and it still is today. That mission hasn't changed as director of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. And then briefly about the agency, we have the 47 state parks in our state, which hopefully many of you have been to. roughly 90,000 acres throughout our state, some of the prettiest property in our state. We manage the state's 9 welcome centers, which are 8 of which are at the borders of our state as you enter in by car. And we manage the state's film office, all of our recreation grants, both state and federal. And then, of course, the T is tourism, which is the biggest part of our agency, and by most measures, the largest industry in the state. I've been fortunate to be in that position now for 10 years, as I mentioned before. And while certainly challenging times, we've had a nice run of the last 10 years. I look forward to getting that back on the next run here coming up soon. So thank you, Douglas.
You're welcome. And Dwayne, we're going to stay with you for just a second, because if we can, and you have your finger on the pulse when it comes to occupancy and other indicators as it relates to tourism and how South Carolina is doing. And I think you might be best slated to answer this question, but how's occupancy looking? Can you give us a little bit of an overview there?
Sure, be glad to. The statewide occupancy year to date through September was 46.1%. As compared to last year, at this time was 65.3%. We're down about 30%, not occupancy points, but actual percentage. Just a brief history. We started out a brief history of 2020. We started out January and February, anywhere from 7 to 8% above the prior year, on track for another record year. March started to have an effect, and then we bottomed out in mid-April. We dropped below 20% occupancy for the state, which is unheard of. We climbed back up through about July 4th. That weekend, we did pretty well. We got up to all the way up to 60%. I say all the way because we were coming from below 20, up to around 60%. Then there was a breakout of cases, if everyone remembers, in the middle of the summer. Some of our coastal destinations were actually called out by other state leaders. Did not help the publicity around that. We dropped back to down below 50%, and we climbed our way back over that. The month of September was at right at 50% occupancy. I expect October to be a little bit above that. Since the pandemic started, we have been doing better than the rest of the country and most of what Smith Travel calls, or STR calls, the South Atlantic region, which is essentially the Southeast. We've stayed anywhere from 2 to 6 points, occupancy percentage points above that. While misery loves company, it's still, even as I explained to the governor one day, even at 55 or 60%, most hotels are still not making money. So we're fighting to come out of that. The one sort of silver lining I've seen is that we have closed the gap. By that, I mean, both in RevPAR and occupancy, the percentage down from year over year has come down each month. It's where if it were charted out on a plot, on lines, the lines are getting closer together. And lastly, I'll say that short-term rentals have fared much better than hotels. I think the attractiveness of renting a short-term rental, be it apartment or whole house, of not running into other people, the ability to have a full kitchen, more square footage, I think is all appealed to a lot of people during this time. So we track AirDNA, which tracks most of the Airbnbs, HomeAway, VRBO.com, all of those sites. They have essentially been either flat or up a little bit from last year through most of the pandemic, starting with June. And so as a whole, there's a number of visitors, but the leisure visitor, I've seen the weekend numbers are doing much better than the weekday. The leisure visitor is while not all the way back, about probably 2/3 of leisure travelers are out traveling right now. It's the business traffic that really has not caught back up or even come close at this point. So that's a little quick snapshot of the 2020 occupancy, Douglas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, I know you've got your finger on the pulse, looking at those numbers every single day and looking at it from a statewide perspective, which is really, really important. If we can shift gears a little bit and let me go over to DJ for a second and talk a little bit about, our industry itself. DJ, we've seen 10 years of continual growth in the tourism and the hospitality industry. And as I mentioned earlier, in March, it just kind of came to this screeching halt. What's your current strategy at your management company? Are you still looking at building new properties? Are you finishing up some properties? How are things working with your company? Can you share a little bit about what you're doing?
Absolutely. And I will also want to address the audience that may be direct owners to share some ideas of what we're doing. So obviously we're 100% owner operator. Any hotels that we manage, we own it 100%. So therefore our objective is to preserve the burn rate. And that means revenue in and expense out. How are we managing those expenses and keep the burn rate low?
Obviously, the 10-year horizon, definitely we had a good run. And March, like you said, it screeched and halt. April was the worst month, about 65 to 70% revenue drop. And obviously we had to take actions, which is payroll dollars, which is salary and wage reduction, also negotiating with the vendors on payment programs, and at the same time working with the banks to make sure how do we create some deferment program. At the same time, in terms of new growth, or we have one hotel under construction. Thank goodness we didn't break any other grounds. So downtown Greenville, AC Hotel. The hotel will be ready by November, but we plan to not open it now. No need for it. The banks were very cooperative, and we're pushing the opening till March of first week. So hopefully we have some good tailwind for us to open that hotel. In terms of opportunity, yes, we are looking out there to see if there's any opportunity to deploy capital towards acquisitions right now. Obviously, in the acquisition, it goes into certain parameters. First is preferred equity, where you're trying to help another owner out that may be in a challenge. Second, it's basically your CMBS debt that may be coming out. A lot of these are going back to special servicers. Third is also note purchases that are coming out. So you've seen a lot of different kinds of opportunities that are coming out right now, but we're being very disciplined to make sure that we take care of our own shop right now, preserve the cash, and make sure you have a long runway. And I keep it on the 4 pillars. One is we needed the PPP round 2. PPP first round was fantastic, and I thank the administration for the speed of that dollars that came to our bank account, where it allowed us to survive. And that was like an oxygen tank. Number 2 is we need the election outcome. Basically, that will give us some visibility and stability. Third is obviously the vaccine. The faster the vaccine comes, that's going to translate to consumer confidence. And corporations and group meetings are not going to meet until that vaccine comes out, period, because of the exposure and the liability. So our 2 group house hotels, Charleston and Greenville, right now, we've become pretty much a leisure hotel. There are no meetings, as you could obviously imagine. But that's a little bit of a color of what we see and what we plan to do. So it's basically hold each other's hands and keep sailing forward with all the stakeholders.
Great, thank you, and very, very much look forward to seeing your new AC hotel in Greenville. I've seen the virtual tours of it, and it is spectacular, and should be very proud of that product. And I know you are.
Thank you.
Dino, if we can, let's move over to you and talk a little bit about the remainder of 2020. I know that DJ just mentioned, about what his property is doing, and even though we're, sitting about 60 days left in the year, what's your biggest worry for the remainder of 2020? And do you have some hope for 2021? How are things looking on your end?
Absolutely. So when I talked to Congressman Wilson, I had a conversation in March. He told me, echoing what Dwayne said, that the hotel occupancy rate in South Carolina was about 8%. Unfortunately, for knock on wood, my parents' hotel, we were able to, the March-April period was very difficult, but after that, business picked back up. So the AAHOA chairman mentioned the fact that in an interview I read, they were expecting, based on surveys, predictions, that the hospitality industry would get closer to full recovery by, let's say, the summer of 2023. So the question that I think we have to face is, for 3 years, potentially up to 3 years, we're talking about very challenging times. And yes, the Paycheck Protection Program helped, but hotel owners, and secondarily as well, restaurant owners, had very large mortgages. We're talking about high revenue coming in, high revenue going out types of businesses. So there's only so long a bank can have forbearance on a mortgage. And so you look at maybe 3 months, 6 months, but can we go 12, 24, or 36 months in terms of how you manage not being able to make those mortgage payments? So there's a break-even point. There's a point where you can make profit. So how do we get those hotel owners back to the point where they can generate enough revenue to meet their obligations? And like Mr. Rama said, how do you expand? How do you grow the business? So number one, we have 3 phases to Operation Warp Speed to rolling out the vaccine. I think that's one of the keys to getting the country back on track in terms of bringing back the conventions, the business travel, combination of leisure travel, because there is a time between the restaurant industry and the hotel industry. You look at, for example, in South Carolina, from Myrtle Beach to Charleston to Hilton Head Island, we want to see those tourists coming back to those coastal areas, which impacts the entire state. So number one, phase one is going to be our healthcare providers, make sure the vaccine gets to them first. And what we're doing is highly unusual because we are testing a vaccine. The good news is that we're in phase 3 clinical trials for the vaccines. What we're doing is we're manufacturing the vaccines as we test them, which is really historic and unprecedented. So the question then is, we're planning right now to have 300 million doses available in January. If we can move through phase 1 as quickly as possible, then phase 2, which is targeting much of the general population, the question then is, can we accelerate heading into the next 60 days, next 90 days, developing a vaccine, manufacturing it, being that distribution, using logistics with the Department of Defense, the National Guard, state and federal partnerships? Can we accelerate that recovery time from the summer of 2023 to the summer of 2021? Could we move it up by 24 months? If we can, we're talking about really making a very rapid turnaround in terms of helping the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, getting tourism back. And that's going to really, the president said he wants 2021 to be the biggest comeback ever. One of the keys, I think, is getting that vaccine phase 1 into phase 2 as quickly as possible to next year. So I'm very optimistic. I believe it can happen. But Chirag Shah is a very experienced government relations director. You've got great people at the AAHOA board and hotel owners. I think the key thing is for AAHOA to advocate for additional financial protections from Congress as they move through those next 2 phases, because this industry still needs help the next 3 to 6 months.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's some great insight on how things are looking. We hear a lot of these kinds of things in the media sometimes being talked about, but that's, I think, the way that you explained it as much more efficient and and a little bit better. So thank you very much for serving on the panel and sharing that insight with you. And one of the things that you talked a little bit about was a little bit about relationships. And I'd like to go back to DJ if I can and talk a little bit more about, how important are relationships today, not only with your lenders, as you mentioned earlier with the banks, but also with your employees and maybe your brands or and lawmakers. What kind of relationships, how have you modified your business model, and what are you doing to help bridge that relationship?
Well, first of all, it's extremely vital moving forward. And I think we're blessed that we've been around for 47 plus years. So relationship is the hallmark, and that is the culture. And I think what happens when a pandemic hits something like this, your culture truly comes out. Your people rise to the occasion. Your leadership rise to the occasion. And that's what we're blessed with. What we have seen is that communication was the most vital piece to the equation. And that means, first of all, with our associates, being completely transparent with them and completely candor where we are, what we're going to do, and how we're going to get there. And obviously we had furloughs to layoffs, all of the above, just because we did not see the visibility. Sitting in March, when we were doing forecasts with our bank, we thought, oh, by October, everything should be fine and back to normal. And here we're sitting in November, right? So Dino, I really appreciate the points that you brought out, and gives us a lot of visibility and clarity of what is about to happen. Going back to Douglas, your question, first it was our people, the relationship, and how we all compromised. Somebody had to lay off, somebody had to be furloughed, and how do we manage our affairs? It's more emotional management than anything, because everybody was going through the pain. Second is the brands. All the brands that we operate with, Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt, each one of them moved with rapid speed to challenge the operating standards of food safety, the buffet converted to a la carte, room service, all of the above, the concierge to be shut down. So the brands were very cooperative, and we sit on those boards. Obviously, our objective was to make sure safety was the #1 priority for our associates and our guests. And then at the same time, how do we help the owners to curtail some of the cost to make sure we can make ends meet? And then the most critical right now, every owner that's probably watching is working with the bank. The new elephant in the room is the banks. And as somebody mentioned earlier, deferment can only last so long. And how do we work with the banks? And right now, we're all doing forecasts, we're all doing burn rates, we're all giving them our global cash position. And the question by the banks are, how long can you last and survive? And the larger the bank, the harder to negotiate. The smaller the bank and regional the bank, the easier to get through. We also discovered that select service hotels are able to weather the storm better, and economy, select service and down, and full service hotels with the group house hotels, like our Charleston Marriott or the Hyatt Regency Greenville, the larger the hotel, the bigger the challenges, because we don't have the group meetings and conventions. And those hotels have a high burn rate to just keep the hotels open. So going back to the word called relationship, what I salute is AAHOA and H&LA working together, and all the owners coming together to really work with the administration to share with them what we needed. What we badly needed was the second round of PPP money. And obviously that got stumbled for all the reasons there are. But I hope once the elections passes, all hotel owners need the second round of PPP money. And that means there can be different stipulations where 35% in revenue drop to last year should be the qualifier and not across the board that everybody got the PPP money in last round. So this time we truly need to make sure that it qualifies. And I hope that it's a better, efficient way of qualifying the parties and helping and supporting those owners.
Exactly. And thank you for mentioning that as it relates to the PPP and the loans. And, you know, the Small Business Administration keeps releasing more documents and more guidance as far as forgiveness is concerned based upon the threshold in which you borrowed. And so make sure that, just for everyone listening, make sure you pay attention to those and read those FAQs and those official statements coming from the Small Business Administration. It will definitely help you. Dwayne, if I can we flip over to you again and talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the destination marketing side. You know, as we're talking about filling these hotels, and a lot of these hotels kind of falling more into the leisure side of business, there still are corporations, and there still are some groups that are out there and perhaps maybe planning for 5 or 10 years down the road. Have you talked to any of your counterparts in the destination marketing organizations or the CVBs about what their strategy is?
Yes, both, as well as my counterparts in other states, particularly the Southeast. But so we went after CARES Act money. The state received $1.9 billion in CARES Act money from the federal government back to in May to sort of help deal with this. So we basically went dark, if you will, on advertising in mid-March. That we started that back up with inspirational advertising May 1st. Basically, sort of we're there when you're there. You can see some of the stuff on my virtual background, but what you see now, the background, that became our message as of June 1st. Basically, that was the call to action. We're ready when you're ready. But prior to that was sort of inspirational and dreaming messages, if you will, to try to keep South Carolina top of mind. We did that in partnership with a lot of destinations, what I call the Big Five around the state, which is Myrtle Beach, Charleston, Hilton Head, Columbia, and Greenville, as well as some of our, we call undiscovered South Carolina, which is a lot of the rest of the state. And that's sort of been a lot of the messaging are similar all during that time period. We've been fortunate. We haven't had recurring dollars cut from the state budget, but a lot of our DMO partners around the state have. They're dependent upon accommodation taxes, and no one knows better than the people listening on this virtual meeting that accommodation taxes have been down substantially. Therefore, their funding is down substantially. We went to the state, tried to get federal CARES Act money of $40 million. Speed the story up through a series of different processes we went through. We were able to get $20 million in state funding that came into place about 2 weeks ago. 15 million of that goes to that Big Five that I just mentioned, divided out based on accommodation taxes produced. Then the remainder of that 5 million will stay within our agency, and we'll use that to market the whole state, particularly that undiscovered South Carolina, which is essentially the rest of the state. But it's not more than just those 5. I mean, if you think about Beaufort, you think about Georgetown, Rock Hill, you think Aiken, Camden, et cetera. A lot of the places along the Mountain Ridge and the upstate, a lot of the other state we promote as well. But the marketing dollars, what we focused on since that time has been the drive market. And that's essentially a 350-mile radius outside of Columbia, if you will, but goes out as far as Ohio. If you think about Interstate 77 as a direct route to Ohio from South Carolina, we focus on that. That's where probably most of our advertising is taking place now. We're spending our normal advertising on that, as well as some of that additional $5 million that I mentioned. That's for the most part what the other destinations are doing. For the Myrtle Beach and Charleston have gotten some new flights back in, so they are spending some on the fly market, but most of ours is on the drive market. Even in normal times, 80% of the people that come into our state come by way of car. And so that's where our focus message is now. On the leisure side, about 70, and it varies. It's dropped as low as 55, but as high as 75, but roughly 65 to 70% of people are willing to travel between now and the next 6 months. So we focus on that. However, they're typically willing to go shorter distances and shorter durations. So we focus on that market to try to get those people. We want them to go to Charleston instead of Savannah. We want them to go to Myrtle Beach instead of Wilmington. We want them to go to Greenville instead of Charlotte. I mean, that is essentially what we're trying to do. It is about, the pie has shrunk, and we're trying to increase our slice of the pie, even though the pie has shrunk. As I mentioned earlier, the leisure market is still out there. And I think DJ mentioned a couple of times there, and I concur wholeheartedly, the business traveler really not back yet, partly due to liability, but also the business traveler not back on the meeting side. So meetings, large groups, downtowns are sort of out of favor. Hilton Head has led the way in occupancy for our state. While low, they've still had the highest occupancy in the state really since it started back. And if you think about it, Hilton Head does not have a defined downtown. So I know hotels, I've talked to my counterparts in Georgia and the DMOs in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta struggling mightily. So downtown's sort of out of favor. Open air spaces, particularly during the good weather, were very successful along the beaches and our state parks. A lot of outdoor space doing very well. I expect that to continue through some of the winter, but once late December, January rolls around, it gets a little cold to be outdoors too much. But so that may change. But that's sort of from a marketing standpoint, what we're trying to do now, Douglas. That's a little bit of a recap of what's going on right now.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll just reiterate one other point, that any of the operators that are on the webinar today and listening, make sure you reach out to your local DMO, your local CVB, asking them what they're doing, and build that relationship. As DJ had mentioned about building these strong relationships, make sure you're connected with them if you're not currently connected. Dino, if we can, is there anything operators can do to express, outside of just mere concern about the industry? Is there anything the operators can do in the administration, talk about maybe their policies or procedures, anything that they can do to help, just express the fact that there is some assistance needed?
Absolutely, and I echo what Mr. Ramos said. Is we need to utilize and really take the AAHOA voices together collectively, because that's where your power is, through your PAC, through your collective action, and really work with your member of Congress. I think that's really key for, the second round potential stimulus. Got caught up in some politics. So post-election, there's an opportunity the next 30, 60, 90 days to have those discussions with your member of Congress, express the urgency about trying to turn around this industry, especially if emergency use authorization occurs for a vaccine, and we're really talk about spreading that vaccine, quickly distributing it around this state of the country, and really help get the industry back on track. But the key thing is really leveraging the relationships that AAHOA members have built over the years. There are a lot of members of Congress who represent coastal areas, who represent states with very big tourist industries. You look at from Nashville to Charlotte, you look at South Carolina. There's a real opportunity to leverage those relationships and say, look, you have a very large community of businessmen and women who run hotels, motels across the country that make an enormous impact in terms of jobs and taxes paid at the state and federal level. This industry is really hurting. Here's where we could use your help. But I think it's really time to leverage those relationships and put some pressure on members of Congress in a bipartisan fashion to say, here's how to fashion a stimulus. Because look, there's a lot of competing industries. Every time there's a major bill working its way through Congress, it's going to bring everyone out of the woodworks in terms of lobbyists and different industries. So the question then is, yes, this industry is important, but there'll be other people saying we need to help this industry. We need to help the cruise lines. We have to help middle-class families. We have to help whoever. So everyone's going to ask for help during a pandemic. So the question then is, how do you make sure AAHOA members' concerns aren't overlooked? How do we make sure that those concerns reach to the forefront? Because remember, even though this is an important industry, there are a lot of people in Congress who have not worked in the hotel, motel industry. They're not necessarily aware of the numbers. They may not know to the level of detail that the people on this call aware of how much the pandemic has affected them financially. So they may not know what the problem is. So you have to clearly define the problem and present some possible solutions. So we're talking about, for example, work with the banking industry. How do you, what are some of the solutions we have? So leveraging the relationships, talking about the impact of the industry. Don't take anything for granted. Don't just assume because this is a very visible industry in the state. There are a lot of other industries competing for attention in a stimulus package. And so you have to really fight for your community, for your industry, and talk about the importance of having Congress pass some kind of protection to help industry turn the corner in 2021.
Great. I think that's excellent points and very well put about making those relationships. I think because we are in an election year, lawmakers are sometimes more apt to listen a little closer to their constituents because it is an election year. So take that as an opportunity to reach out to them to do that. And then we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to go back to the relationship side and talk a little bit more about banking, because I know that that's a hot button with hotels, and that's a hot button right now, just building relationships. And DJ, if I can ask you to talk just a little bit more about, the importance of relationships with your bankers. Is there anything any advice that you might give, maybe a small independent operator that is struggling right now with their local bank?
Absolutely. So I think, first of all, with your bank, what's happening right now is that there's an issue with banking regulators who are saying that, my bank is expected to do the following things. And what does that following things mean? One is they're going to ask you for every information that they can, meaning all your businesses and your forecasts and your cash burn and your cash balances in every account. So they want to get a complete global position of where you are. And their objective is to make sure that how long can you last? That's their mission, right? So my recommendation to you is go ahead and cooperate, show them. But then when you get to the table about what their ask is going to be, there's going to be a few asks. One is either they're going to increase your cost of capital. They're going to ask you to put interest and principal reserves for 6 months in the bank, in their bank. Or they may say, let's do an appraisal and we may need to pay down the loan by this much. Not that we want to do that, but these are all the various asks that they're going to do. And the fourth one, the most culprit of this whole situation, is the debt coverage ratio. We are not going to pass any debt coverage ratio in the next horizon, meaning next year and a half or so. So that's the leverage that they have upon us. And that's where you have to work with your bank to say, listen, I will cooperate, I will work, but you need to eliminate the debt coverage ratio, because that debt coverage ratio keeps on triggering an appraisal, and there's no appraisal that you can do to sustain the values of your assets. So I think the objective is work through the chronological sequence, give and take, make sure that you are able to come to a happy medium that creates a win-win. And remember that they're protecting their exposure, but you're also protecting your exposure. And also the other most important thing I forgot to mention is the guarantees. They may come back and say, I need to increase your guarantee on this loan because of the XYZ reasons. So you need to come to a happy medium to find a balance between your objectives and their objectives. And if anybody's on this call, and feel free to reach out to me, would be more than happy to help. But I would say that I say this way, this is a health pandemic. This is not a business pandemic. And Mr. Banker, don't remove the ventilator while I'm in the ICU room. This is the time when I need the ventilator as a good borrower that I've been with you. So I think, do what's right for you and cooperate with your banks.
And DJ, thank you so much for that. That's an excellent way to end this conversation. We have run up on time. We do have a hard stop. I do want to thank all of the panelists again for your time, your expertise, sharing some insight, sharing a little bit about what you're feeling and how this pandemic is working, and what the state of the hospitality industry here is in South Carolina. And Chet, I'm going to turn it over to you so folks can go back into the main room for the officers update.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your perspectives on the industry. And
Now, I would encourage everyone to go over to the general sessions, hit the lobby button and then general sessions to hear from the officers. Thank you once again.